Okay then, hope you enjoyed your break. We're going to look now at preventing sport injuries and sporting injuries. Do you have any ideas? Think of some things that we might do in order to help prevent injuries. Think about some of the things you do in training. Well, in terms of prevention. In the past, if I'm honest, sports care was more concerned with diagnosing and treating rather than preventing. Now, as we moved on, we know that many times once an injury starts to surface, it's too late then by that time, okay? Sports medicine has certainly moved on in recent years in a very positive way. In terms of prevention, we can, in simple terms, prevent injuries by identifying the risk factors and then addressing those risks with preventative measures. Okay then, so for football, athletics or any other sporting activity, we can have a prevention program in place. Now, a comprehensive prevention program will include some of the following. I am going to just go through my list and I'm going to touch on each one in far more detail. So, we can look at pre-sports physical, for example, similar to a parkour. We're also going to consider appropriate clothing and footwear. We're going to consider having the respect for your environment, okay? Respecting your environment in the correct way. The use of proper equipment, proper coaching. We're going to look at being in shape, being fit for football and not the other way around. We're also going to consider as part of our prevention program not overdoing things, how to structure your workout properly, and the need and the emphasis for proper technique. So let's go through some of these in a little bit more detail then. The need for a pre-sports physical. This should ideally be performed by a qualified doctor. It will assess your overall health condition, okay? Your blood pressure, your heart rate and so on. It may detect conditions that might cause injury. It also may detect conditions that might disqualify the athlete or player from participation, okay? Not always. You may need to just adjust things a little. Certainly it will assess your fitness for the chosen sport you want to take part in. And then the GP will be able to make recommendations for an exercise program. I'm thinking about you with an older person, for example. Imagine somebody wants to play walking football. Now we know you need to be 50 to take part. So these guys may have not played any sports for a while perhaps. Before they can join in with walking football, we need to know that they're fit enough and they're healthy enough to play in that specific activity. That's going to really help us to prevent injuries going forward. We've touched on this one, and the need for appropriate clothing and footwear is very, very important from a preventative point of view. If we have the correct equipment, clothing and footwear, it's going to make exercise safer and far more enjoyable. We need to be able to keep the body temperature at a comfortable level. So, at the start of the warm-up, wear more clothing than you need. Have your tracksuit, have your hat and so on. Take off the layers as necessary. Of course, if it's cold, I'll give you an example. If players are very, very cold, let's say middle of February, and the coach, he's a little bit old school perhaps, and he's doing the stop, stand still method, and he's talking away for 5 or 10 minutes. Well, I think it's sensible there, in that case, to let the kids wear a hat. Keep them warm, okay? We know we lose heat through the top of our heads, from our extremities. Keep the players warm. Footwear we've already touched on. It's so important you have the correct shoes for your sport or activity. Also socks. That's something that's often not considered. If your socks are not suitable, okay, if you play football wearing thin socks, you're going to get blisters. Wear the correct football socks. This will help prevent blisters and aid support and cushion your feet in that way. I've seen people playing futsal, for example, indoors, just in their futsal trainers, or not even trainers in some cases, like boat shoes and so on. Ridiculous. Yeah, no socks on, they're going to get blisters. There was a guy playing just across from me, and his shoe actually came off and kicked somebody in the face. So he was an idiot, and the people playing with him were idiots too. Okay, should not have been allowed. Should have been stopped straight away. Okay, you need the correct equipment. It's very, very important that you respect your environment. Take care of the weather. Watch what's going on. Okay. Look at your players, especially in hot conditions. Are they overheating? In cooler conditions, are they too cold? Okay, this is very, very important. We know that athletes and players may become too hot or too cold, depending on the temperature, the humidity, which is very important, and wind conditions as well. We often forget this one, okay, particularly in the UK. If it's very windy, there's a wind chill factor as well. That can really bring the temperature down. Humidity, that's not something we really suffer too much with in the UK. My experience of working abroad, it was a big problem for me, okay. I needed to make sure, even as a coach, I was drinking regularly. Yeah, I was losing a lot through sweat just coaching. And the players were working hard, so I really needed to make sure in that heat and that humidity, they got plenty of fluids on board at the right times. I'll give you some tips for cold weather exercise. It's far more applicable to us in the UK at this point. If we look at endurance sports, such as long distance running and so on, they don't require as much clothing as stop-start sports, such as football. Because if you're going out for a run, you'll go for a run. You won't stop, you won't have the coach there talking to you, you won't have a breakdown in the play and so on. Multiple layers we've talked about, that's a great idea, particularly in football. The fabrics that we use. Now, sportswear has come on in tremendous leaps and bounds in recent years. When I started playing, believe it or not, we were still wearing cotton shirts at some point when I was a kid, okay? Then there were these horrible nylon jerseys that people still remember. People seem to have such great affinity for these days, these retro shirts. I don't know why, because they were horrible to wear, okay? They were itchy and they were sweaty. If we look at more modern fabrics, polypropylene fabric is recommended. This is what sportswear manufacturers use these days, okay? This carries sweat away from the skin. But it also, quite crucially, keeps the body from cooling too rapidly. So there's a nice balance there. We know that most heat is lost through the head and face, so if we can, let's keep it covered. I encourage my young players to wear hats in the winter. They're happier when they're warm, I'm happier as a coach, and there's less chance of them getting injured. Also, of course, people forget this one. You need to remember to stay hydrated even when it's cold. We still lose a certain amount of moisture. Remember, we lose it through our breath, okay? And they will be sweating. In terms of the environment, we often talk about heat, and we talk about cold. Something else we should consider is air pollution. Not really a problem for me where I live. Quite a rural area, really. Until recently, of course, only urban areas were affected with heavy air pollution. But sadly, not in my case, but some rural areas, you also need to be aware there. Okay, it is encroaching on the countryside a little. Okay, please take note of that. Watch local weather and be cautious about exercising in very heavily polluted areas in terms of air pollution. It's not good for you. Okay, certainly not good for the players.